I want to pick up on Justice Kagan's and Justice Gorsuch's questions. The district said the sole reason it was doing this was to avoid Establishment Clause problems, correct?
Correct, and was specific to endorsement.
Okay. And then to pick up on Justice Gorsuch, the Lemon endorsement test, that has not been applied by this court in several decades in cases like Van Orden, Town of Greece, American Legion. At least I've said, I don't think there is such a test in our case law anymore, the Lemon endorsement test, correct?
Sure, but it's a stubborn fruit, and I don't think just pushing a pencil through it has done the trick. I mean, you really have to slice it in half and make clear to everybody.
There have been individual opinions, but we haven't applied it in the cases. I take your point, but I think Justice Kagan's point is there's a whole separate body of cases involving schools. And so Engel, Lee versus Weissman, and Santa Fe. And Santa Fe is the football case, and so that's the most relevant one here, I think. And the question here, I think, is what's different about this from an Establishment Clause perspective than the prayer over the loudspeaker, which I think was a key fact, in Santa Fe? How would we distinguish Santa Fe from this case?
So Santa Fe is readily distinguishable. It is an endorsement case, so you might want to be clear that at least to that extent it's no longer good law. But it's distinguishable. The loudspeaker is a huge part of it. But if you'll remember the Santa Fe case, I mean, one of the issues is the school district argued, hey, this is a facial challenge to our policy, and under the policy it's possible for the student to give a non-religious solemnization. And so this can't possibly be invalid on its face. And the court's response to that argument was to focus on the state action, the government's own involvement in a majoritarian election for the opportunity to give the prayer over the loudspeaker. So as I reread Santa Fe, I was struck by how much of the court's analysis turned on the election aspect of the school's policy, which has no analog here whatsoever. But to give a concrete example, I do think if the coach goes to the loudspeaker after the game, there's a much stronger argument that that's government speech. And
also there's, just to pick up on Justice Kagan's point, then you have the captive audience that seems to be at the heart of Engel, Lee versus Weissman, and Santa Fe. And the question really is what's different here. You can answer that in any way you want, but just...
Yeah, but I think that the loudspeaker sort of ties this audience back to the government speech and ties it all together. I think, when Mohammed Salah, has a religious exercise after a goal at Anfield, the fact that the crowd is there is incidental. It's not a captive audience in that sense. It's not he who brought them there. So I think it kind of comes back to government speech in that respect. And I think when the coach takes this 15-second fleeting prayer at the end of the game with no loudspeaker, barely audible, it's radically different from the use of the loudspeaker and is much similar to Mohammed Salah, Tim Tebow, all of those things. Or think about what happens when a player gets injured on the field. I mean, it's common practice at all levels of the game, public school, private school, you take a knee. The coach takes a knee, the players take a knee. Many of them presumably are praying for the player's health. Some of them are not. Some of them have their own religious traditions. But none of that is coercion, not in the real sense, and none of it violates the Establishment Clause.
What about the player who thinks, if I don't participate in this, I won't start next week, or the player who thinks if I do participate in this, I will start next week, and the player wants to start?
So that's where I think making a clear message that that's inappropriate, that this doesn't matter for those purposes, that's how you deal with those problems. And if there is a coach or a teacher...
How will you ferret that out? Because every player is trying to get on the good side of the coach, and every parent is worried about the coach exercising favoritism in terms of the starting lineup, playing time, recommendations for colleges, et cetera.
I think the school district, if it has that concern, and I'm not saying it's not a legitimate concern, just makes it as clear that it's school policy, that nothing turns on that. But that concern, although legitimate, isn't even specific to religion. I mean,
I agree with that.
I mean, if the coach is out wearing a Packers jersey, I mean, there's an incentive for the players to follow on, and it's not just coaches, because for most kids, frankly, the teacher is going to be the avenue towards collegiate success, not the coach. It's both, but that's why if you take that. If instead saying the way to deal with that is you punish, if any coach or teacher does it, shame on them and they should be punished. And you make clear that that's not supposed to happen and can't happen in this school.
I guess the problem at the heart of it is you're not going to know, because the coach is probably not going to say anything. Like, the reason I'm starting you is that you knelt at the 50-yard line. You're never going to know, and that leads to the suspicions by parents. I think, I'm just playing out what the other side is saying here, the suspicion by parents that the reason Johnny's starting and you're not is he was part of the prayer circle. And, that suspicion's, I don't think you can get around. That's a real thing out there. That's going to be a real thing in situations like this. I don't know how to deal with that, frankly, though.
Well, if it's a real thing, then there's really, as I see it, there's sort of two alternatives, right? You can work really hard to dispel it. Mm-hmm. Or you can say, well, that's a possibility. It's not limited to coaches. It's not limited to religion. So we're going to effectively overrule Tinker and say that, if you're a teacher, you can't do anything sufficiently expressive that students could try to mimic it in a way that curries favor.
One last question, and you mentioned this, it's not just religious speech that would trigger issues, it's others. So to your argument that this is private speech and therefore Garcetti, how do you handle the hypothetical again of the coach who goes out and wants to unfurl the political banner at the 50-yard line or wants to put on a political message at the 50-yard line after the game?
So if the reason that the school district is acting is because of disruptive or even just because it's political speech and it wants to take action, that's Pickering. They can do that. So those are sort of an easy case. I also think like flags are kind of, I know they're fun hypos, but they're easy cases because there's kind of no reason to unfurl a flag other than to communicate with your message, your audience. And that's not true of this kind of prayer. It may be very important to somebody to do it in the place where the activities took place. It may be that incidentally there's an audience there, but it's nothing inherent in the event for it to be sort of shown off to the audience. And I don't think you can really say that about unfurling a flag.
Thank you.